everyone, welcome back to my channel. Today we are going to talk about cranial cavity. First we'll start our topic with introduction. Cranial cavity is the largest cavity in skull that houses the brain and associated structure. It provides protection, support and passage for critical nerves and blood vessels. Understanding the cranial cavity is essential in neurology, surgery and anatomy as it plays a vital role in brain function and structural integrity. Further talking about the introduction, cranial cavity is formed by neurocranium which encases the brain. It contains meninges, cerebrospinal fluid, cranial nerves and blood vessels. It is divided into distinct regions known as cranial foci which support different parts of brain. Now let's talk about the divisions of cranial cavity. The cranial cavity is structurally divided into three main cranial fossa. The first is anterior cranial fossa, the second is middle cranial fossa, and the third is posterior cranial fossa. First, we will talk about anterior cranial fossa. It is located at the front of cranial cavity. It supports the frontal lobes of brain. It is formed by frontal bone, ethmoid bone, and sphenoid bone. It contains the cribriform plate that allow passage of olfactory nerve, that is olfactory nerve number 1. Now let's talk about the middle cranial fossa. It is positioned centrally and it is deeper than the anterior cranial fossa. It supports the temporal lobe of brain. It is formed by sphenoid and temporal bone mostly, and it houses the sella turcica which encloses the pituitary gland. It contains various foramina for cranial nerves such as foramen ovale, foramen rotundum, foramen spinosum, carotid canal, superior orbital fissure, etc. etc. Now let's talk about the posterior cranial fossa. It is located at the back of the cranial cavity. It supports the cerebellum, brainstem, and occipital bone. It is formed by occipital and temporal bone. It contains the foramen magnum that allow passage for the spinal cord and vertebral arteries. Now let's talk about the key anatomical structures in the cranial cavity. These are the meninges. That are the three protective layers that surround the brain. That are dura mater, arachnoid mater, or pia mater. The next anatomical feature of cranial cavity is cranial nerves. There are 12 pairs of cranial nerves that exit the brainstem and control the sensory and motor function. Next, we have an important anatomical structure that is blood vessels that include major arteries like the internal carotid artery and vertebral arteries that supply blood to the brain. The next we have is cerebrospinal fluid that circulates within the cranial cavity and protects and nourish the brain. Now let's talk about the clinical and surgical importance of understanding the cranial cavity. It is important to understand the trauma and skull fracture, as damage to cranial cavity can impact brain function. It is important to understand the neurosurgery, as procedures like tumor removal and aneurysm repair require precise knowledge of cranial structure. It is important to understand meningitis and brain disorder, as infection and disease affecting the cranial cavity can lead to severe neurological issues. Now, conclusion or end point is the cranial cavity is essential protective space for the brain. It houses vital structures that support neurological functions, circulation, and sensory pathways. Understanding its anatomy is crucial for medicine, neurology, and surgeries. So this was about the cranial cavity. Hopefully you liked the video. If you do, don't forget to like, share, subscribe, and comment. Thank you for watching.